The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Clarence's house as Camilla, queen consort, prepared for another royal engagement. She stood before her ornate dressing table, adjusting the delicate pearl necklace that had become her signature piece. The necklace was nothing extraordinary to look at, 3 strands of lustrous pearls with a simple gold clasp, but it held special meaning for her. It had been a wedding gift from Charles, chosen specifically because of its understated elegance. As her lady-in-waiting, Sarah approached with the day's schedule. Camilla reached up to make one final adjustment to the necklace. The pearls felt slightly loose today, she noticed, but thought nothing of it. Royal jewelry often needed maintenance, and she made a mental note to have it checked by the palace jewelers when she returned. The engagement was at a children's hospital in London, one of Camilla's favorite types of visits. She genuinely enjoyed meeting the young patients and their families, finding their resilience and spirit deeply moving. The royal car pulled up to the hospital entrance, where a small crowd of well-wishers had gathered despite the short notice of the visit. Inside the hospital, Camilla moved gracefully from ward to ward, stopping to chat with children and their parents. Her warm smile and genuine interest in their stories made each interaction feel personal and meaningful. She had a particular gift for putting people at ease, especially children who might otherwise be intimidated by meeting royalty. In the pediatric cancer ward, she spent extra time with a young girl named Emma, who was undergoing chemotherapy. Emma's eyes lit up when she saw Camilla's necklace, commenting on how pretty the pearls looked. Camilla leaned down to Emma's level, allowing the little girl to get a closer look at the jewelry that had caught her attention. As they chatted about Emma's drawings and her dreams of becoming an artist, Camilla felt the familiar weight of royal responsibility mixed with genuine human connection. These moments reminded her why she had embraced her role in the royal family, despite the challenges and scrutiny that came with it. The hospital visit concluded with a brief meeting with the medical staff, where Camilla learned about their latest research and treatment programs. She promised to continue supporting their work through her patronages, understanding the vital importance of their mission. As she prepared to leave, Camilla felt a sense of satisfaction about the day's work. The children's faces, their courage, and their family's strength had touched her deeply. She looked forward to returning home to Charles and sharing the stories of the remarkable people she had met. The journey back to Clarence's house was peaceful, giving her time to reflect on the afternoon's events. She gazed out the window at the London streets, thinking about Emma's artistic dreams and wondering how she might help support young people pursuing creative endeavors through her charitable work. Upon arriving home, Camilla headed straight to her private sitting room, where Charles was waiting with tea and the evening newspapers. It was their daily ritual, sharing tea and discussing their respective engagements while catching up on the day's news and correspondence. As she settled into her favorite armchair, Camilla reached up to remove her pearl necklace, as was her habit when relaxing at home. But as her fingers touched the clasp, she felt it give way unexpectedly. The necklace slipped from her neck, the pearls scattering across the Persian rug with a soft pattering sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Charles immediately looked up from his newspaper, concern crossing his face as he watched Camilla stare at the scattered pearls. She seemed frozen, her hand still raised to where the necklace had been moments before. The sight of her beloved jewelry broken on the floor should have been upsetting, but manageable. After all, pearls could be restrung, clasps could be repaired. But Camilla's reaction was far from normal. Her face had gone pale and her breathing became shallow and rapid. She dropped to her knees on the carpet, not to gather the pearls, but to stare at something else entirely. Among the scattered pearls lay a small tarnished silver locket that had apparently been hidden within the necklace's clasp. Charles rose quickly from his chair, moving to kneel beside his wife. He had never seen this locket before, and judging by Camilla's expression, neither had she. The locket was old, its surface engraved with delicate flower patterns that had worn smooth with age. It was clearly not part of the original necklace design. With trembling fingers, Camilla picked up the small locket. It was heavier than it appeared, and she could feel something moving inside it. Charles watched silently as she struggled with the tiny catch, her hands shaking so badly that she could barely manage the delicate mechanism. Finally, the locket opened with a soft click that seemed to echo in the suddenly tense atmosphere of the room. Inside, nestled in faded blue velvet, was a folded piece of yellowed paper no larger than a postage stamp. Camilla's breathing became even more labored as she carefully unfolded the tiny document. The paper was old and fragile, threatening to tear at the creases where it had been folded for what appeared to be decades. The writing on it was in faded brown ink, in a handwriting style that suggested it was quite old. But it was still legible enough to read, and as Camilla's eyes scanned the words, her composure finally shattered completely. Charles reached out to steady her as she swayed, the color draining from her face entirely. He tried to see what was written on the paper, but Camilla clutched it protectively to her chest, her eyes wide with what looked like terror rather than simple surprise. She began to shake uncontrollably, and Charles realized this was far more serious than a simple shock over finding hidden jewelry. Whatever was written on that paper had triggered something profound in his wife, something that went far beyond mere surprise or curiosity. "Camilla, darling, what is it?" Charles asked gently, his voice filled with concern. But she seemed unable to speak, staring at the paper as if it contained the most devastating news imaginable. The normally composed and resilient woman he knew had been replaced by someone who looked utterly shattered. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece and Camilla's rapid breathing. Charles had seen his wife handle numerous crises with grace and dignity, from media scandals to family dramas, but he had never seen her react like this to anything. After what felt like an eternity, Camilla slowly lowered the paper from her chest. Her hands were still trembling as she looked at Charles, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear, confusion, and something else he couldn't quite identify. It was as if the contents of that tiny piece of paper had unlocked a door to something she had never expected to face. Charles waited patiently, understanding that whatever was happening required delicate handling. The broken necklace and scattered pearls lay forgotten on the carpet between them, suddenly seeming insignificant compared to the small locket and its mysterious contents that had so completely devastated his wife's usual composure. With great effort, Camilla managed to find her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Charles, this changes everything." She held up the tiny piece of paper with hands that still shook. "I don't understand how this could be possible." Charles moved closer, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "May I see it?" he asked gently, not wanting to pressure her but clearly concerned about her extreme reaction. Camilla hesitated for a long moment before slowly handing him the paper, watching his face carefully as he read the faded words. The message was brief but devastating in its implications. "Your daughter lives. She was not stillborn as they told you. Find Margaret Thornberry Hampstead, 1979. Below this, in different handwriting, was an address and what appeared to be a hospital reference number. Charles read the message twice, trying to understand its significance. He knew about Camilla's tragic loss decades ago, a daughter born during her first marriage who had supposedly died at birth. It had been one of the most painful experiences of her life, something she rarely spoke about even with him. The grief had nearly destroyed her at the time. "But this is impossible," Charles said softly, looking between the paper and his wife's devastated face. "The doctors confirmed. We saw the death certificate. You held her." He trailed off, seeing the pain in Camilla's eyes at the memory. Camilla shook her head slowly, her mind racing through the events of that terrible day in 1979. She had been so young, barely 22, and the pregnancy had been difficult from the start. When complications arose during delivery, she had been given medication for the pain and had drifted in and out of consciousness. She remembered the hushed voices of medical staff, her then-husband Andrew Parker Bowles pacing nervously in the hallway, and the devastating news delivered by a doctor she had never seen before or since. Their daughter had been born with severe complications and had lived only minutes, they were told. The family had held a private funeral, and Camilla had struggled with grief and guilt for years afterward. But now, holding this mysterious message, details that had always seemed slightly strange began to surface in her memory. The doctor who delivered the news had been a substitute, not her regular physician. She had never actually seen her daughter's body clearly. She had been told it would be too traumatic given the circumstances. The funeral had been closed casket, arranged quickly by the hospital. What if they were wrong? Camilla whispered, her voice gaining strength as the possibility took hold. What if there was some terrible mistake, or... She couldn't finish the sentence, but Charles understood what she was thinking. What if it hadn't been a mistake at all? The implications were staggering. If their daughter had somehow survived, she would now be a grown woman of 46. She would have lived her entire life not knowing her true identity, while Camilla had spent decades mourning a child who might still be alive. Charles stood up slowly, his mind reeling from the revelation. "Who is Margaret Thornberry?" he asked, though they both suspected she might be connected to whatever had happened at the hospital that day. Camilla clutched the locket tightly, her initial shock beginning to transform into something else. A fierce determination that Charles recognized from her most passionate charitable work. "I don't know," she said, her voice growing steadier. "But I'm going to find out." The room seemed to shift around them as the full weight of the discovery settled in. If this message was true, it meant that everything they thought they knew about that tragic day in 1979 was wrong. More importantly, it meant that somewhere in the world, Camilla's daughter might be living her life. Unaware of her royal heritage and the mother who had never stopped grieving for her, Charles looked at his wife, seeing the familiar steel beneath her elegant exterior beginning to emerge. He knew that look. It was the same expression she wore when championing causes she believed in deeply. Whatever the truth behind this mysterious message, he realized that Camilla would not rest until she uncovered it, no matter what the consequences might be for their carefully ordered royal life. The following morning, Camilla woke before dawn, her mind already racing with plans. She had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling while Charles dozed fitfully beside her. The small locket sat on her bedside table, its presence both comforting and terrifying. She had made a decision during those long, dark hours. She would investigate this mystery personally but carefully. As a member of the royal family, any public inquiry could create a media storm that might hurt innocent people, especially if Margaret Thornberry or potentially her daughter were involved. Charles had offered to help, but they both agreed that his involvement would make discretion nearly impossible. Instead, Camilla would use her personal assistant, David Hartwell, a man who had worked for the royal household for over 20 years and whose loyalty and discretion were absolute. By 8 o'clock, David was sitting in Camilla's private study, listening with growing amazement as she explained the situation. His usual calm demeanor wavered slightly as he examined the locket and read the mysterious message, but his professionalism quickly reasserted itself. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "this is obviously a very delicate matter. How would you like me to proceed?" His tone was respectful but concerned, clearly understanding the potential implications of what she was asking. Camilla had thought this through carefully. "I want you to find Margaret Thornberry quietly. Start with the address on the paper, though it's over 40 years old. Check public records, but use your personal contacts, not official channels. And David," she paused, looking directly at him, "this must remain completely confidential. Not even the other staff can know." David nodded solemnly. He had handled sensitive matters for the royal family before, but nothing quite like this. "Of course, Your Majesty. What should I tell them about your schedule changes?" Because Camilla had already decided to clear her calendar for the next few days, claiming she needed time to recover from a minor illness. Over the next 3 days, David worked with the methodical precision that had made him invaluable to the royal household. The original address led to a small terraced house in Hampstead that had changed hands multiple times since 1979. However, using electoral rolls and property records, he was able to trace Margaret Thornberry's movements through London over the decades. The trail led him to a quiet nursing home in Surrey, where Margaret Thornberry, now 78 years old, lived in comfortable retirement. David had learned that she had worked as a senior nurse at the private hospital where Camilla had given birth, specializing in difficult deliveries and neonatal care. When David reported back to Camilla, he also brought disturbing news about the hospital itself. The facility had closed in 1985 amid financial irregularities and questions about some of its practices. Several staff members had left abruptly around that time, and some records had mysteriously disappeared before the facility's closure. "Your Majesty," David said carefully, "I believe Margaret Thornberry may indeed have information relevant to your inquiry. However, I should warn you that approaching her directly carries significant risks. If she contacts the media..." Camilla understood the risks, but her determination had only grown stronger over the past few days. "Arrange a meeting, David. Use your discretion about how to approach her, but I need to speak with her personally. There are questions only she can answer." That evening, as she sat in her private sitting room with Charles, Camilla found herself studying family photographs with new eyes. Pictures of her children from her first marriage, of Charles's sons, of the grandchildren she adored. All of them seemed somehow incomplete now, as if there was a missing piece to the family puzzle that she was only just beginning to understand. Charles watched her with growing concern. "Are you certain about this path, darling? Once you speak with this woman, there may be no going back. Whatever she tells you will change things permanently." Camilla looked up from the photographs, her eyes bright with unshed tears, but also with unwavering resolve. "Charles, for over 40 years I've carried the grief of losing our daughter. If there's even the smallest chance that she's alive, that I've spent 4 decades mourning unnecessarily while she's been out there somewhere, living her life without knowing the truth. I have to know." She paused, picking up the locket from the side table where it had rarely left her sight since the discovery. "Someone hid this message in my necklace for a reason. Someone wanted me to find out the truth, even if it took decades. I owe it to that person and to myself, and possibly to a daughter I thought I'd lost. To see this through." Charles nodded slowly, understanding that his wife had made her choice and that nothing would deter her from pursuing it. Tomorrow, David would contact Margaret Thornberry, and they would finally begin to learn the truth about what had happened in that hospital room all those years ago. David's phone call to Rosewood Care Home was carefully planned. He introduced himself as a private researcher working on behalf of a family seeking information about medical care received in the late 1970s. He requested a private meeting with Margaret Thornberry, emphasizing the sensitive and confidential nature of the inquiry. The response was unexpected. Instead of the confusion or reluctance David had anticipated, there was a long pause before the receptionist said, "Mrs. Thornberry has been expecting a call like this for many years. She asked me to tell you that she'll meet with your client, but only if they come in person and alone." When David reported this conversation to Camilla, both were struck by the implications. Margaret Thornberry had been expecting contact about this matter for decades, suggesting that whatever had happened in 1979 had weighed heavily on her conscience ever since. 2 days later, Camilla found herself driving through the Surrey countryside in her personal car, having declined David's offer to accompany her. She wore simple clothes and minimal jewelry, hoping to avoid recognition. The nursing home was a pleasant, modern facility surrounded by well-maintained gardens, but Camilla barely noticed the scenery as her anxiety mounted. Margaret Thornberry was waiting in a private sitting room when Camilla arrived. Despite her age, the former nurse was sharp-eyed and alert, her white hair neatly arranged and her posture straight. She looked up as Camilla entered, and recognition flickered across her weathered features. "Your Majesty," Margaret said quietly, rising slowly from her chair. "I've been waiting for this day for over 40 years. Please sit down. We have much to discuss." Camilla took the offered chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Mrs. Thornberry, I found a message in my necklace. It mentioned you and my daughter." Her voice wavered slightly on the last words. Margaret nodded gravely. "I put that message there, Your Majesty. It took me months to work up the courage and then years more to find an opportunity. When you visited the children's ward at St. Mary's Hospital 3 years ago, I was there visiting my great-granddaughter. I saw you admiring the jewelry display in the gift shop, and I managed to slip the locket into your necklace while you were distracted." The confession hung in the air between them. Camilla stared at the elderly woman, processing the fact that this moment had been orchestrated years in advance by someone who had carried a terrible secret for decades. "My daughter," Camilla whispered. "What happened to my daughter?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "She didn't die, Your Majesty. She was born healthy and beautiful, crying lustily when she entered the world. But there were circumstances at the hospital that night, people in positions of power who made decisions that weren't theirs to make." The room seemed to spin around Camilla as the words sank in. Her daughter had lived. All these years of grief, of wondering what she might have looked like, what kind of person she would have become. All of it based on a lie. "Where is she?" Camilla managed to ask, though her voice was barely audible. Margaret reached into her handbag and withdrew a manila envelope. "Her name is Sarah Elizabeth Hartwell. She's 46 years old, married with 2 children of her own. She works as a primary school teacher in Devon and has no idea about her true parentage. She believes she was adopted as an infant by the Hartwell family after being abandoned at the hospital. Camilla's heart stopped.
Hartwell?
As in David Hartwell. The implications crashed over her like a wave. Her personal assistant, the man she had trusted with this investigation, shared a surname with her daughter. David is her adoptive uncle, Margaret confirmed. He's known the truth for years, Your Majesty. His family took in the baby when the hospital arranged the private adoption. He's been working for your household all these years, watching over you, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. The betrayal cut deep, but Camilla quickly realized it wasn't a betrayal at all. David had been protecting both her and her daughter, keeping the secret until circumstances made revelation possible without destroying lives. Who else knew? Camilla asked, her mind reeling with the implications. Who made the decision to tell me my daughter was dead? Margaret's expression darkened. Dr. Whitmore, the hospital administrator, and several others. They had their reasons, some financial, some social. A young woman from your background, unmarried at the time of conception, a pregnancy that could cause scandal. They convinced themselves they were protecting everyone involved. But they're all... Camilla began. Dead, yes. Margaret confirmed. All except me. I was the only one who objected, and they threatened my career, my pension, everything. I was young and scared, but I've regretted my silence every day since. I kept records, evidence, hoping someday I could make it right. Margaret handed Camilla the envelope. Everything is in there. Birth records, the real ones. Medical notes from that night. Photos I took of your daughter before she was taken away, and her current address if you choose to contact her. Camilla held the envelope with trembling hands, understanding that opening it would change not just her life, but potentially the lives of many others. Inside was the truth she had sought, but also the beginning of complications she could barely imagine. The drive back to Clarence House seemed endless, the envelope containing her daughter's information sitting beside Camilla like a living thing. She had thanked Margaret Thornberry profusely, promising that the elderly woman's courage in finally speaking the truth would not be forgotten. Margaret had simply nodded, saying that she could finally sleep peacefully knowing the secret was no longer hers alone to bear. When Camilla arrived home, she found David Hartwell waiting in her study, his usual composed demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. Charles was there too, his face grave with concern and understanding. Clearly, David had chosen this moment to reveal his own connection to the decades-old secret. Your Majesty, David began as she entered, I owe you an explanation that is long overdue. Camilla set the envelope on her desk and looked at the man who had served her faithfully for 20 years. Margaret Thornberry told me about your family's role in this. About Sarah? David's shoulders sagged with relief at not having to begin the confession himself. My aunt and uncle couldn't have children of their own. When the hospital approached them about a private adoption, they were overjoyed. They never questioned the circumstances too closely. They were just grateful for the opportunity to raise a child. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I was 15 when Sarah came to live with them. She was such a beautiful baby, and as she grew, she looked so much like someone I couldn't quite place at the time. It wasn't until I began working for your household years later that I realized the resemblance. Charles had been listening silently, but now he spoke. When did you know for certain? About 10 years ago, David admitted. Sarah was going through some medical issues and needed family history information. My aunt finally told her about the adoption and mentioned the hospital where she was born. When I heard the name and the date, I put the pieces together. Camilla sank into her chair, overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. You've known for a decade that my daughter was alive and you said nothing? David's voice was pained but steady. Your Majesty, what could I have said? Excuse me, but I believe my cousin might be your daughter who everyone thinks is dead. Without proof, it would have seemed like the delusion of a starstruck employee. And even with proof, imagine the chaos it would have caused. He was right, and Camilla knew it. The revelation would have created a media storm, investigations into past royal cover-ups, and would have destroyed Sarah's quiet life without her consent. I waited, David continued, hoping that somehow the truth would come out naturally. When I saw how much you loved children in your charitable work, how you spoke sometimes about the daughter you lost, it broke my heart to stay silent. But Sarah had built a good life. She was happy, married to a wonderful man, teaching children she adored. I couldn't justify destroying that without being absolutely certain she wanted to know the truth. Camilla opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were photos spanning decades. Sarah as a baby, as a young girl with pigtails, as a teenager in school uniform, as a bride, as a mother holding her own children. In every image, the resemblance to Camilla was unmistakable once you knew to look for it. There were also documents, birth certificates both false and real, medical records, and a letter Margaret Thornberry had written but never sent, detailing everything that had happened that night in 1979. Charles moved to stand behind Camilla's chair, looking over her shoulder at the photographs. "She's beautiful," he said softly. "She has your eyes, your smile." The most recent photograph showed Sarah at what appeared to be a school event, surrounded by young children who were clearly her students. She was laughing at something one of them had said, her face animated with joy and warmth. She looked genuinely happy, fulfilled in her chosen profession. "Does she know she's adopted?" Camilla asked David. "Yes, my aunt and uncle told her when she was 8. She's always known, but she's never shown much interest in finding her birth parents. She says my family is her real family, and that's all that matters to her." This presented Camilla with an agonizing dilemma. She had spent 40 years mourning a daughter who was alive and thriving, but that daughter had built a life without her, had found happiness and purpose, and might not welcome the disruption that contact with her birth mother would inevitably bring. "What kind of person is she?" Camilla asked, hungry for details about the child she had never been allowed to raise. David's face brightened. "She's wonderful, Your Majesty. Kind, funny, incredibly dedicated to her students. She reminds me so much of you in the way she cares for others. She volunteers at animal shelters, runs a reading program for disadvantaged children, and is always the first to help when someone needs it." As Camilla absorbed this information, she realized she faced the most difficult decision of her life. Should she reach out to Sarah and risk disrupting a happy existence? Should she reveal the truth about royal parentage that could change everything? Or should she be content knowing her daughter was alive and well even if they never met? The weight of 4 decades of grief wrestled with the uncertainty of an unknown future. While the photographs of her daughter's life spread across the desk like pieces of a puzzle, she was only now beginning to understand. For 3 weeks, Camilla carried the weight of her decision like a physical burden. She found herself distracted during official engagements, her mind constantly wandering to the photographs of Sarah that she kept locked in her private safe. Charles watched with growing concern as his wife struggled with the impossible choice between her own need for connection and her daughter's right to an undisturbed life. The decision was ultimately made for her in the most unexpected way. During a routine visit to a primary school in Devon for a literacy initiative, Camilla found herself face to face with her daughter for the first time in 46 years. Sarah was there as part of a delegation of local teachers, having been chosen to present the school's reading improvement program. When she stepped forward to make her presentation, Camilla felt her breath catch in her throat. The resemblance was even more striking in person. The same facial structure, the same gestures, even the same way of tilting her head when concentrating. Sarah delivered her presentation with passion and eloquence, clearly devoted to her work with children. She spoke about the importance of early intervention in reading difficulties and the need for continued funding for educational programs. Camilla found herself barely able to concentrate on the words, overwhelmed by the surreal experience of listening to her daughter speak about work that mirrored her own charitable interests. When the formal presentations concluded, there was a reception where Camilla had the opportunity to speak individually with the teachers. When Sarah approached, extending her hand in greeting, Camilla felt as though time had stopped. "Your Majesty, I'm Sarah Hartwell," she said with a warm smile. "Thank you so much for supporting our literacy programs. They make such a difference to the children." The surname hit Camilla like a physical blow, confirmation of everything she had learned from Margaret Thornberry and David. She managed to maintain her composure, engaging Sarah in conversation about her teaching methods and the challenges facing primary education. As they talked, Camilla found herself studying every detail of Sarah's face, looking for traces of Charles, of her own family, of the baby she had held so briefly 4 decades ago. Sarah was animated and passionate when discussing her students, her love for her work evident in every word. "You remind me of someone," Camilla found herself saying, the words escaping before she could stop them. Sarah laughed, a sound that sent shivers through Camilla's heart. I get that a lot. My Uncle David always says I have one of those familiar faces. The mention of David created an almost unbearable moment of connection across the years of separation. Camilla realized that this chance meeting might be the only opportunity she would ever have to be close to her daughter, without the complications that would arise from revealing the truth. After the event, Camilla made a decision that surprised even Charles. Instead of pursuing contact with Sarah, she chose a different path. Working through David, she quietly established a trust fund that would provide additional resources for Sarah's literacy programs. She arranged for anonymous donations to support the reading initiatives that Sarah was so passionate about. Through David's carefully maintained connection to his family, Camilla was able to follow Sarah's life from a distance. She learned about her daughter's promotion to head teacher, celebrated quietly when Sarah's own children achieved milestones, and felt a profound sense of pride in the woman her daughter had become. The broken necklace was repaired and restrung, but Camilla chose not to hide the locket again. Instead, she wore it openly, a small silver reminder of the daughter she had found and chosen to love from afar. Charles understood her decision, recognizing that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when not to interfere. Sarah continued her teaching career, unknowing of the royal mother who watched over her charitable work and celebrated her successes from a distance. She remained close to David's family, never suspecting that her uncle's position in the royal household was anything more than fortunate coincidence. Years passed, and Camilla found a different kind of peace than she had expected. The grief of loss had been replaced by the quiet joy of knowledge. Her daughter was alive, happy, and making a positive difference in the world. Sometimes, that was enough. On quiet evenings at Clarence house, Camilla would sometimes look at the photographs in her safe and feel grateful for Margaret Thornberry's courage in revealing the truth. The knowledge that Sarah existed, that she was thriving, had healed wounds that Camilla hadn't even realized were still bleeding. The secret remained between Camilla, Charles, David, and the elderly nurse who had finally found peace in her confession. Sarah Hartwell continued her work with children. Supported by anonymous benefactors she would never know were her birth parents, living a life that honored the values Camilla held most dear. In the end, love had found a way to bridge the gap of decades even without direct contact, creating a connection that transcended the circumstances of their separation.